Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our session from Vontobel. The topic today is ESG and Swiss equity research hot topics. I'd like to stress two words on the title, Swiss and equities. We will talk about Switzerland and we will talk about equities. We will not talk about bonds. We will not talk about real estate or anything else. My name is Fössmeier. I'm an analyst in Swiss equity research and Vontobel's wealth management. At Vontobel Wealth Management, we manage a little less than 25 billion in Swiss equities. That's Swiss francs, of course. What we thought we'd do is, after we have incorporated ESG into the valuation of Swiss equities for 3 years now, we'll discuss hot topics from an economic perspective and from a legal perspective. I will cover the economic perspective, and my colleague, Dr. Tadas Zukas, will cover the legal aspect. Tadas.
Thank you, Simon, and a warm welcome also from my side. My name is Tadas. I'm a lawyer, so I hope you will enjoy an exchange between a finance economics person and a lawyer on the topics that all of them have a regulatory dimension. I'm doing full-time sustainable finance regulatory work at Vontobel, mostly focusing on group-level topics. I am also publishing on the topic of regulatory sustainable finance matters. I'm also teaching a course at Zurich University Sustainable Finance Executive Program, a course on, or a module actually, on navigating greenwashing risks. So I'm happy to exchange our insights and looking forward to an interesting session. Back to you, Simon.
Thank you. So we thought we'd cover 5 things. We thought. I'm not sure this works. Well, I know what we're going to cover. So we'll talk about the full integration of ESG metrics into the valuation of Swiss equities. We'll talk about the Swiss gender quota. We'll talk about the evolving landscape of corporate reporting. We'll talk about greenwashing and the regulatory tsunami. So let me start by how we integrate ESG metrics into the valuation of Swiss equities. And you can read this chart from top to down or from bottom up. The value of a company is always the value of future cash flows adjusted for 2 things, the time value of money and risk. And what we do is we adjust the risk according to our ESG assessment. We have 15 metrics, 5 in each category, E, S, and G. All 15 metrics are relevant and material. And our analysts score these metrics on a 5-point scale. That's the whole story. And with that, we can adjust the risk in the future cash flows. Now, why is this different than just having an ESG rating, and why does it make sense? If you have a value of a firm and a separate ESG rating, let's say company ABC is worth 1,000 and the ESG rating is A- or 90% or whatever, what you're implicitly saying is that ESG does not impact the value of the company. And the fact is, it does. We show on this slide 5 areas that McKinsey has identified. ESG can influence the revenues, it can influence the cost, it can influence the productivity, it can influence the cooperation with supervisory authorities, and it can optimize investments and capital allocation. So you cannot, or you should not, separate an ESG and the value of a firm, because it is interlinked. Now, what have been the recent trends on the legal front in this respect, Tadas?
It's a fascinating, actually, topic, how the entire sustainable finance debate has evolved over, I would say, around 2, 3 to 4 last years. So I would say 3, 4 years ago, we would have even not differentiated between so-called ESG input approaches and ESG output approaches. So looking at the risk side and looking at the impact. Today, it's a common understanding, a common knowledge. What I have on the slide for you is excerpts from Swiss laws and then European regulations, showing that it is not just a viewpoint to see ESG risk integration as something of financial importance for a company, but the regulators see it the same way. The legislators partly also do that as well. So if you look at the bottom left side of the slide, you have a definition from the European Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, and you see that it includes a very narrowly defined concept of what they call sustainability risk. And as you see in the definition, it is very clearly focused on the financial materiality. So ESG factors actually having an impact on the value of the investment. So this SFDR is, as most of you will know, strongly product focused. I have another definition for you from the European Banking Supervisors report, which includes a kind of a more macro level definition of ESG risk, actually even using a different term to define the concept. And pay attention to these nuances in how regulators and supervisors define and talk about the topic. There are many nuances in this area. What the European Banking Authority emphasizes is the risk dimension, not on the product level, but on the level of the entire financial institution. So these are definitions that we actually already know since a few years. It's a common knowledge, as I say, sometimes underestimated the impact that those will have on the financial processes. For your interest, I also included a few quotes from the Swiss banking self-regulation. So in Switzerland, we actually approach the topics usually first. We see if we can do it by way of self-regulation, and you will notice that there are many similarities to the European approach in how compared to how we, Swiss Banking Association, define the topic. So we have, the association have done that in 2 instances already in the course of last few years. One case is the self-regulation on the integration of clients' ESG preferences. That's the first definition, and the second one is the one-pager published this summer on client information regarding ESG risks. Both, again, as the European Union's definitions are clearly focused on financial risks. So it's not financial, and perhaps a first indication that, on the direction which we'll also see on the when we'll be dealing with other topics. Now, I have also reference to a few documents by Swiss FINMA, so it's Swiss Financial Markets Regulatory Authority, which has, well, actually around 2018-19 started to publish a risk monitor, and actually dedicates a page on a very small sub-aspect of ESG risk, and namely so-called climate-related financial risks. So also here, keep in mind the focus. We have been listening a lot to the need to focus on E. I would even say, from the regulatory perspective, you would even have to narrower focus to fulfill the regulators' expectations, and take a look at so-called not just climate risks, but financial risks related to climate. With my limited abilities, graphical abilities, I've tried to create a chart showing all these nuances that you have in the meantime, and basically every half a year I have to add another layer, because the debate becomes more and more nuanced. So you certainly, at the core of the topic, from the regulatory perspective, you would first have to deal with the climate-related financial risks, And you have a broader category of climate risks, sustainability risks. You saw the definition, very narrowly defined, but obviously much broader than just climate, and actually broader than ESG. ESG are just 3 main dimensions. And then you can kind of continue well, you can even continue in the way in which the European supervisors have started to do this summer by just adding related risks. So basically to every category, if you add a related risks, you would have all the litigation, regulatory risks, and perhaps even greenwashing risks. So with that, I'm giving the word, I think, back to you, right,
Yes,
Simon?
yes.
Do I recall it correctly?
So you won't be surprised that in our assessment, we look at diversity. And diversity is not just male-female, it's cognitive diversity. And diversity really needs to be tailored to the corporation. If you have a company that is only doing business in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, you probably don't need a board member with work experience in Asia, whereas a global corporation obviously needs more cognitive diversity on its board. Now, the Swiss gender quota has been introduced in 2000. Tadas, what's the detail of the Swiss gender quota?
So we knew that the session will be the last this evening, and we thought we have to add some really interesting remarks and insights on that. So how I try to present the topic is that actually the fascinating aspect about how the Swiss legislator have or is trying to approach the topic is not just by introducing actually quotas in strict sense, but by, well, I actually used a quote from a United States Supreme Court justice, and the Americans are actually using this maxim as a kind of regulatory tool for more than 100 years. It's called sunlight is the best of disinfectants. So basically by creating transparency, you can actually nudge the markets into the direction in which the society expects. And this is exactly what the Swiss legislator is doing. So these are not quotas in strict sense, but basically a voicing of regulators' expectations that you have 5 years to reach certain percentage in one case and even 10 years in the other case. And only if you don't reach that, then the regulatory obligation kicks in, so-called comply or explain approach, that then you will have to explain why you're not managing to do that. And obviously the investors who care about those topics can start asking questions, and perhaps you'll reach the same objective with a much lighter regulation, or actually a lighter or a less restrictive intrusion into market mechanisms. So that's the kind of legal background. The interesting thing is that the Europeans are using a similar approach in the SFTR area, but we'll discuss about that a bit more later on.
We have looked at how the share of females in the management board or the executive committee and the board of directors has developed over the past 3 years, if the gender quota has actually helped. So what you can see is the top 3 charts, the number of female CEOs, CFOs, and chairwomen has more or less remained unchanged. What you see at the bottom, though, is that the gender quota and the executive management team and the team of board of directors has increased. So there's good news and there's bad news. At the bottom right, you see the number of companies in our coverage, and that's about 100 companies, that fulfill the gender quota on both counts for the executive management team and the board of directors. 3 years ago, it was 7, and now it's 26. So, good news is the number has increased more than 3-fold. The bad news is more than 70%, or actually 70 companies, have some explaining to do, because this is comply or explain. So they need to explain why they cannot fulfill the gender quota, and they need to explain the actions that they are taking. And all this, of course, is part of corporate reporting. So over the past couple of years, we have seen an evolving landscape of corporate reporting. Reporting on the subject of sustainability or ESG has changed dramatically. But the status quo is that there are still very, very significant differences. And I'm going to show you some good examples and some not so good examples. So I'm also the insurance analyst, and you won't be surprised that I emphasize the insurance sector here. I think the sector overall is doing quite well. The two leading global reinsurers, Munich Re and Swiss Re, have published on climate change in the 70s, in 1973 and 1979. That means they have 40 years of experience in reporting on ESG topics. On the other hand, we have a mid-sized Swiss company, which I won't name, that has issued a sustainability report consisting of 4 pages last year. Cover page, picture of CEO, a few data points, and impression. We also have a company that is in the construction sector that forgot to report on waste and water consumption because the numbers were compiled by a part-time student who quit. Enormous differences to what I would call a good example, Zurich Insurance Group, with an integrated sustainability reporting, almost 100 pages. We have all kinds of metrics. We have a separate publication on their dedication to the UN SDGs, and they provide us with an Excel worksheet consisting of 16 worksheets with data. Contrast that to what I've shown you on the right-hand side. Enormous differences. And as an analyst, I can only say to management teams, you can only get credit for what you disclose. So what are the legal developments on the reporting front?
There has been surprisingly a lot of legal developments on this side, and part of it is super technical, so hundreds of pages. We sometimes call it a regulatory tsunami. The other side is conceptual, and I think many people working technically on those projects sometimes miss those conceptual developments, and I would like to start the presentation of this part actually by noticing that the conceptual development that we see now in the jurisdiction that sees itself as a leader in sustainable finance or sustainability regulation is the European Union and its Sustainable Finance Action Plan. Actually, just beginning of this year, CSRD, so Corporate Sustainability Reporting, came into force, and we sometimes speak just saying, it's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive as if that was the title of the previous version of that. Interesting thing is that it is actually a result of a so-called fitness check of the directive, which was in force for 10 years, and it was called Non-Financial Corporate Reporting Directive. You may think that this is just lawyers noticing that it's a play of words and not so important, but actually it is of fundamental importance, and the European Union takes the time actually to explain why that change was done. So I'm quoting the recital as a kind of preamble of the law, in which the regulator explicitly says that it is not correct anymore to call ESG, sustainability-related information, non-financial. I mean, just think for a second about that. What kind of impact does that have, for example, on corporate governance, where we know that these so-called non-financial topics have been covered by functions, perhaps somewhere outside of finance. So we could do a separate session on that. So this is the biggest development. I think there's kind of still on the radar, but as the regulation will start to be implemented, I think the organizations will notice what was actually mentioned in various sessions here, that it is certainly not just communications, and certainly one person just telling something about this area is not sufficient. It has to be integrated throughout the organization, and the fundamental change needs to be reflected in corporate governance arrangement. Have in parallel to you in Switzerland, we will have a corporate ESG reporting obligations coming into, or we will have first reportings beginning of the year. We still call it, our law still calls it non-financial. Partly the legislator is still not yet at the level of the most advanced jurisdictions such as European Union, but we see from the comments of Swiss government that they are actually noticing that, and I think with time, certainly the trend goes that those standards will be aligned. In both cases, we see something which was, Tadas mentioned that 5 years ago, most probably 95% would not know what I'm talking about, the so-called double materiality. So the European Union focuses on that very strongly. So not only the risk side, meaning impact of ESG factors on the company, but also the so-called inside-out perspective, the impact of the corporation's activities and products on the ESG factors. Reporting will be required on those aspects, both in Switzerland and European Union, and it reaches is just completely another level in the sense of that they have their own reporting standards, which have been published this summer. In Switzerland, we still have, the comply and explain approach in European Union. It becomes really a mandatory reporting. Also, the integrated reporting, so-called integrated reporting, is becoming a norm in the European Union, meaning it's not a separate report, which the regulator also explicitly comments in the preparatory document, saying that if you're publishing your financial report and after half a year you do something non-financial, perhaps not so important, it sends a wrong signal. Similarly, as the use of wording of non-financial sends a wrong signal. Really big difference between how European Union and we here in Switzerland approach the topic is, in European Union, the entire reform of corporate sustainability reporting was part of the European Union Sustainable Finance Action Plan. Really, so there's really, I think also in the audiences, I think everyone understands that there is no sustainable finance without quality ESG data, and actually these reporting obligations should bring that data to the market. So we are at the beginning in that sense, and so the audit requirement on the European Union side is another indication that the quality of that data is taken very seriously, and it's a big topic. Switzerland first reports will have to be done beginning of next year already. So for this year, European Union rollout starts a year later. We just have to keep in mind that in the case of European Union, we speak of a completely different kind of a new standard, which is much more extensive than the Swiss. The Swiss government has noticed that how fast that development goes, and actually doing press releases, communications, explaining that they are looking at it, and we actually have a reassessment of the law, which is not yet in force. We know that reassessment is ongoing to reflect the fast-paced European developments. sometimes, as lawyers, also we hear remarks, who will read all that? And then for that reason, I included a note there on the very precise requirements on the electronic format of that reporting. And I'm saying, keep in mind that those reports will be largely, or certainly at least in part, be read by machines, by artificial intelligence. And here again, we have some pioneering projects coming out of Zurich University and some other leading universities developing tools where you can basically do first check of your report's quality without any involvement of a human. So perhaps as a first step, or supporting humans, but this is where the trend goes. So keep in mind what will be reported will be read, perhaps in large part even by machines. And then to close this part, we know that European Union is planning for 2028 to launch a so-called single access point, which will be a centralized database curated by the European Capital Markets Supervisor, ESMA, on all sustainability-related entity-level and product-level data, also comparable. So the quality will be higher, the availability of data will be higher, and you will, if it goes according to the plan, you will have that information on the regulator's website, 2028. Remember the date, and I keep emphasizing to my colleagues working on the implementation of the regulatory obligations that keep in mind one challenge is obviously for the company to implement all these requirements. The other challenge is to think how the company and its products universe will look like if some client or potential client will go on that database and then compare you on the sustainability-related aspects with your competition. I think with that I said almost everything on what I wanted to say on the topic. Right. Simon, back to you.
Thank you, Tadas. I think it's also important to mention, not only in reporting, but this is where it shows the most, you need the commitment of the C-suite and the board of directors. I've shown on the previous slide, we have heard a CEO say our clients don't pay us for ESG. And we've heard a CEO say, we don't do this for fun, we do this because it earns us money and because it's the right thing to do. So imagine what these messages can do to your staff and more importantly to the public and your clients. The next topic then is on greenwashing. And from an analyst point of view, it's really difficult to measure greenwashing risk. It's difficult to quantify it. But what we can say is that greenwashing has been called the biggest risk of ESG investing. And what we have seen in the past few years is that some companies are more impacted than others. Or shall we say they're more exposed to greenwashing accusation, which doesn't mean that they actually commit greenwashing. And companies that are more exposed to the accusations of greenwashing are usually those that you know. Companies with a brand name, like Nestle. Everybody probably here has a product from Nestle at home. But a software company like Temenos, that few people would even know, has less risk of being accused of greenwashing. Now, it's very hard to incorporate this into valuation, but what we can say is that it's very easy to accuse a company of greenwashing and then you'll see it in the share price. But it's even harder to define what greenwashing actually is. And many people think that there's no definition of greenwashing, but actually there are many. And Tadas will guide you through the various definitions of greenwashing and what that means for corporates. Tadas.
Happy to do that for sure. As I said, I'm doing the entire module on that at Zurich University's executive program and published a bit. So I like to describe the development, and you partly see some insights here which I have not shared yet because the field develops like almost monthly if you if you do work in that field, you have to really follow the market and the regulator's activity so closely that, slides like that become outdated in a few months. What we have experienced in sustainable finance in particular over the course of last 2-3 years in European Union, but also generally globally, is what I call the regulatory tsunami, the term that I already mentioned, which we experience in sustainable finance area, has hit the topic of greenwashing. And I mean by that we have such a level of intensity and amount of regulatory activity worldwide, but especially in European Union, that we have not experienced something like that before. I have a few examples. Let's start with some global developments. So it started 2011 in November with IOSCO, the standard setting body of securities exchange commissions, published, I think it's around 100 pages document with their recommendations in sustainable finance area. Part of that was their understanding on how greenwashing needs to be defined. Almost in parallel, the Swiss FINMA has also published a guidance on preventing greenwashing in asset management area, so it's among the first regulators worldwide, which also includes a definition of a viewpoint on greenwashing. We have FCA, so UK's regulator, we have Singapore, we have Sweden, we have the US, basically all regulatory initiatives in this area mention or even really put the strongest or very strong focus on the greenwashing prevention topic. What is common when we look at all those definitions, obviously if we would have 1 hour only on that, we could go through them, it has actually started with a kind of focus on marketing. So many people still think, it's marketing, and then you run it through compliance, will be all fine. It's really not, and then you would think it's just about products, originally at least. So that's certainly not the case. The definitions include not only products, services, but also entity-level communications. And then if you look at kind of product life cycle, it's not just marketing. It's the product launch, product recommendation, or we speak technically about the point of sale. The exchanges between the advisor and the client on the sustainability related of qualities of a product, and then reporting. Another fascinating aspect, and again a kind of a fundamental thing, which usually goes unnoticed because we are also focused on technicalities and implementation of all these many regulations, is if you think, greenwashing should be actually something about green claims, right? So if you look at the dictionary, certainly you'll find it's a company presenting itself as more green, more environmentally friendly, when that's not the case. The definitions of greenwashing and sustainable finance actually all are going much broader than just covering green claims. So, you could say ESG washing or sustainability-related claims. Obviously, sustainability is much more than just green. I say, obviously, we spend a lot of time challenging that practice, but I think we have to accept it that, it's kind of became a convention to call, actually, what should be technically called kind of sustainability or ESG washing, greenwashing. But keep in mind, in your organizations, obviously, it's not just about environmental claims. I would like to use the next few minutes discussing a case study, which is the European Union's regulatory tsunami in this area of preventing greenwashing. And the list that you have on the right side of the slide is, I think I've not shared it yet publicly, but obviously nothing secret there. These are the existing definitions in existing sustainable finance regulations or related official documents. So you see the list, almost We started with 5. So when with my colleague, we have started to write a deep dive paper on the topic. 1.5 years ago, we had 5 definitions, actually in each major legislative piece of European Union Sustainable Finance Action Plan. And now it had expanded, and just 2 months ago, all 3 European regulators have published their own reports on greenwashing, on how to deal with the problem, or these are actually intermediate reports, so more than 200 pages from 3 regulators. And if you read through those reports, and you are technically working in that field, it's really worth reading. You will see that it's a phenomenon which actually touches upon every possible aspect of business activity of a company, but even the regulators are actually thinking about what kind of effects that could have for the entire financial system, even systematic risk effects in terms of, what if people think these claims are worthless about greenness of the product. So we have those 3 reports, which actually kicked off this summer actually, and we know that the regulators are mandated to publish their final reports in May 2024. So those who don't have time to read the intermediate reports, you can then read the final reports in May next year. And what the expectation there is that we will have one common definition, kind of general definition or understanding of greenwashing, beside all the existing technical definitions tailored for each specific law from the European Union Sustainable Finance Action Plan. You see actually a code which if you scan that, it's from my deep dive paper, which I co-wrote with a colleague. You can access that online at the Zurich University's website and read it. So with that, Simon, I think that was enough on the greenwashing topic.
Well, we've mentioned the word regulatory tsunami a few times. And the difficulty really is, this is one area, but how does it affect investors is another area. In wealth management, you have a hard time telling clients you need to do something because of regulation. So how can you tackle this? Just before I start, a couple of fun facts. The short summary of the EU taxonomy is more than 500 pages. The number of ESG reporting provisions in the past 4 years has increased by 74%. And in 80 countries, there are more than 400 reporting provisions. So to keep track of this is a profession on its own. What I suggest to do is kind of to categorize the sponsor of a certain regulation, the purpose of the sponsor, and I'm also giving you a couple of examples. But in a client conversation, I think it's always important to say that this is helping the markets to function. So the first category, I think, are the United Nations that focus on ESG or sustainability. And examples for some of the projects are obviously the UN PRI, which for a wealth management client is irrelevant. It's relevant for financial institutions. And of course, the United Nations SDGs, where you can consider to align your investment goals with these SDGs. So that's the first category. The second category then are all kinds of standard setters. And as an analyst, these people are very important because we need data. But we get, on one hand, we get too much data. On the other hand, we don't get enough data. We don't get the data that we want. So to have standards and transparency in reporting is important. So the standard setter really has started to look at climate reporting. I think this will be expanded in the future. The third and fourth category then depend on your geography. Where are you physically located? What is important for you? If you are in Europe, obviously the EU action plan is important. It started to look at the E dimension of ESG and will be followed by the S and G dimension. And of course, the EU action plan is the key element here. If you are in a different region, Switzerland, the US, you have all different kinds of initiatives that are important, like the Swiss Climate Score, and of course, the requirements from the SEC in terms of reporting. Again, I think it's important to help people understand that this helps financial markets to function. Tadas, you have a few tips for people how to master or how to tackle the regulatory tsunami.
Yes, certainly happy to share some observations from a regulatory lawyer's point of view, and then hopefully open an interesting discussion. So I think the regulatory environment has certainly reached a level, at least in Europe and Switzerland, but I think also globally, due to the increasing attention of the society and regulators towards the topic, where you have to really master the field before you start talking about it, doing something there. As I started my presentation, my part of the presentation, with the remark, that certain differentiations which were not made 3-5 years ago, today it's a common knowledge. So, to clearly understand that the responsible investment is not the same as sustainable investment, and ESG investing is not the same as sustainable investing. Transition finance is something different than green finance. So this immense level of complexity, and so that certainly you have to keep that in mind before you do something in this area. I emphasize this point so strongly because there are still people thinking that just enough to hire one person which will start talking about the field, and then we'll have that field covered for the company. Obviously, we needed to add a kind of a qualification that if you have a good advisor, that certainly helps in this initial stage, but certainly my view is that you have to develop your own internal capabilities within a company to cover the field. Then second point, walk the talk, and it's a simple way to say avoid greenwashing or be aware of greenwashing risk. Kind of most basic rule, avoiding greenwashing and kind of starting to pay really serious attention to the risk is ensure that there is an alignment between what you communicate and what you do. And I sometimes say that the best recipe here is start with doing first and not with saying what you want to do or will do or what you want that you would be doing, because that I think is the biggest source of greenwashing risk, right? If the communications marketing department decides to launch a campaign without talking to people doing, creating the product. And the third point is actually related to the fundamental shift that I have addressed when I talked about the corporate sustainability reporting. So it certainly goes into the direction that it is seen, at least in the most pioneering jurisdictions, as not non-financial. So again, a kind of a best general guidance recipe of avoiding problems in this field is take sustainability-related communication as seriously as you take financial communication. You'll certainly not ask your lawyer or compliance officer check if your numbers, financial numbers, are correct. And sometimes we still see this feeling that you just can simply resolve sustainability-related communication matters by just running it through some kind of check. Actually, you have to have organizational measures, same as with numbers, ensuring that that your talk on the topic reflects what you in fact do. Now, Simon has mentioned a few impressive numbers about just several laws. There are much more than one or two laws, and so even within the regulatory lawyers community, we say we are actually overwhelmed by this regulatory tsunami, which now continues for more than 1 or 2 years, actually. So I'm sometimes asked, what is the best recipe to really navigating it in a way that kind of you will not have to change your approach with every new communication. And there I say you have to really understand the kind of underlying methods that legislators are using in different jurisdictions. And actually, so in the case of European Union, they really focused on transparency as a tool. So they think if they will give market investors enough information, they will actually take the right decisions. And well, as we like it to do it in the European legal tradition, also kind of by conceptually creating the sound foundations for the entire area. There are other jurisdictions with different approaches, and these are the usually common law countries like Australia or United States. They don't wait for thousands of pages or even any new regulations. They would just apply some basic laws saying that if you cannot say false things about product or a company, and then start an enforcement action. So most important example, obviously, last year was Australian regulator, which announced last summer that they will start an anti-greenwashing campaign, and well, they had, I think, 45 cases until today, doing a press release on almost every case, so kind of naming and shaming. And well, I think to navigate the field, you have to really understand, what are the kind of really fundamentals of the geography, as Simon, as you said, that you are most exposed to. Stating the obvious, obviously, in this group, that regulatory tsunami is a reflection, actually, of a larger trend. Some would even say a mega trend. So all the topics that have been discussed here over these now 3 first days, you would have almost each of those addressed in a regulatory standard, old and new. Keep that in mind, and keep in mind that the scrutiny of those claims is increasingly almost by every day. And last point, and I'm here a bit biased, obviously, speaking about the internal capabilities in the legal and compliance area. First of all, regulatory know-how area. You have to have in-house resources, I would say, to properly navigate the field. You cannot rely just on external expertise, and especially if we deal with a shift which is as fundamental as the one that we are talking about. Regulatory expertise in the sense of really reading the laws, understanding what the intention of the law was, what the regulator wanted to achieve with that or another provision. And we saw some examples, actually, where markets really for years misunderstood the intention of the legislator with regard to very key laws. That has happened with the SFDR, as some of you will perhaps know. For years, actually, the entire market was thinking or using SFDR articles 6, 8, 9 as labels until, well, actually, the regulators have started to send first signals that is not the intention, was not the case almost 2 years ago. In the meantime, we have explicit statements in the intermediate report by the European regulators saying that describing these article products, SFDR article products, as some kind of sustainability categories is a misuse of the system, and they even address very specific aspects of those market conventions, such as describing the product as light or dark green. It is explicitly said in the report by the European regulator of 2 months ago that it's a practice which needs to be stopped, and so that was the last remark on my side. I think with that we would like to open the floor for a few questions, if you would have any. Sure.
I'm a journalist. My name is Pierre Novello. Just a question about performance of this green investment, and what are you offering to your clients? Only pure green company who are following the rule and so on? How do you, first, what are the performance compared with the bad company which are not really following the good rule? And how do you mix with other parts or other kind of companies which are not so good?
So comparing performance, there's a vast amount of academic literature on the topic. The problem is that looking at performance is not just good enough. You need to look at performance and the risk that you're taking. And risk is different for every investor. For some investor, risk means having a tracking error versus a benchmark. For some, it means losing money. For others, risk means not having the same amount that they invested 10 years ago. So you need to ask yourself, when you look at the academic research, what's the purpose? What do they really look at? And I give you an executive summary of the academic research, and then I give you my personal view. So there are research reports, academic research reports, that would tell you that there's a clear link between ESG investing and better performance. The most popular study is from Friede Busch-Bassen from the year 2015. The problem is that data collection ends in 2014, so that's almost 10 years ago. And in the past 10 years, we've seen significant flow into ESG investing. Having said that, their report is kind of the standard report that everyone loves to quote, because they came to the conclusion that of 2,000 academic research reports, 90% said that there is a non-negative relationship. And of course, banks love to quote this. Now, there is the exact opposite. There are a couple of academic research reports that tell you there is absolutely no relation between ESG and good performance. Again, you need to watch closely. Some of these reports only look at a 6-month period, or only look at the US, or only look at Europe. So again, you need to ask, what's the purpose of the study? So my view is, you really can't answer the question, because you need to ask, first of all, what do you want to find out? And how do you adjust for risk? What geography are you looking at? What time period are you looking at? But just changing the time period, you can probably come to exactly the conclusion that you want to come to at the beginning. For me, ESG investing means that you are probably limiting your downside risk, and that's intuitive, because if you look at ESG, a company that has better governance is likely to avoid pitfalls. And with that, you have less downside risk. I think that's the most we can say. Whether you have green tech outperforming utilities is a question of time, it's a question of sector rotation, and many other things. Performance of ESG is not happening overnight, long-term process. So what I would argue in client communication, it is likely to provide a downside protection, and more cannot be proven academically. A question over there?
Sonia Cabrera from Cabrera Advisors Consultancy, and I have a question regarding more within the bank. Do you have KPI performance indicators for asset managers, bankers, everybody who invests? Do you have that when they invest in sustainable investments, that they would have an incentive to invest in them, or that it would make an impact in their performance, yearly performance, or something like that?
So the answer that I'm giving you is probably not the answer you would like to hear. But in wealth management, we advise clients. We cannot have KPIs saying you need to sell ESG products. We need to advise in the interest of our clients. So it's actually, it would be wrong to have ESG KPIs by saying a client advisor must sell at least 30% of the products must be ESG products. However, we obviously have performance KPIs. So if my recommendations are poor, then I suffer. And this is obviously also true in asset management.
Hello, my name is Yazid. I'm a student at the University of Geneva. I just have a question concerning ESG investment strategies. I was wondering if you think that the multitudes of strategies could be an issue when it's come to ESG investing, or you look at this as a holistic approach? Maybe.
So the strategies need to fit the risk-taking ability of a client. And usually banks have different categories or different boxes, I should say. You can start by saying, I want to exclude certain companies, certain sectors because of moral values, like tobacco, alcohol. The second is to say, I invest best in class, which then means you're doing relative investing, benchmark investing. The third is full integration, and there's a difference in full integration. It can mean full integration in the investment process, or it can mean full integration in the valuation. And we obviously advocate the latter, that we fully integrate ESG metrics in the value of Swiss equities. Then you have thematic investing, where you'd say, I don't know what to do, but I think, let's take green tech is probably going to boom in the next few years. And then you have all kinds of engagement or impact investing. So that's an orientation that you can present to clients as a categorization of investment styles.
Yeah, my name is Melissa Davis. I'm a writer in this area. I was just wondering from the analyst perspective, if you're looking at nature disclosures yet, nature and biodiversity. I realize the TNFD is just launched. And then from the legal perspective, where you see the journey in Switzerland on nature disclosures, but also on human rights and social impact.
You'd like to start?
So on nature, I think it depends what sector you're looking at. Again, I think a software company, you wouldn't be afraid that they spill the oceans, if I may put it that way. So yes, it depends on the sector, but we need to be very careful. I've looked at one single ratio, and that is CO2 emission per full-time employee. And again, just for the insurance sector. And I cover 6 companies, I have data for 5. In 2022, the worst company had 1,800 kilograms per full-time employee, and the best had around about 1,000. They're all Swiss insurers, and I wondered, why is that the case? Well, it turns out the company with the value 1,000, that number referred to 2021 because that's a global insurer, and they just didn't get the data globally in time. And then you start digging deeper and you find out, well, in insurance, CO2 emission is mostly travel. And the 2 global insurers naturally have more flights than a local insurer. A local insurer then needs to look at the cars driving around, and that is very difficult to estimate. Just looking at my watch, we have 13 seconds left, so I'll give you 10 seconds.
I will try to set a record responding to such a complex question in 5 seconds. I think the journey will go to the direction of alignment with European and global standards. So, if a standard is launched, usually takes a bit of a time, but we already see, as I explained, that the financial regulators, especially, climate risk is actually also a kind of has a nature element in it, and I think we can expect, but I don't have any insights that the journey will go into the direction in which the entire global standard setting direction goes.
So Heba, also from the University of Geneva, and you talked about the gender quota data, and I was wondering if you've witnessed strategies actually emerging to boost and nurture leadership potential among women, because quotas are something, but like strategies on the operational side are something else.
Again, I think we can say that it differs very much from sector to sector. And you can accuse the companies that they haven't started early enough, but the fact is, in insurance, there aren't that many female leaders. Whereas in the classical sectors, marketing, human resources are used to be, and still are, classical job for females. And a company that is in the construction sector will have difficulties attracting females. The quota is across all sectors. From my personal point of view, it's not the Fontobel view, is it didn't work without quotas, and introducing quotas obviously has helped. I think that's the shortest answer. Well, thank you very much for being here, and we're going to be around for further questions. Tadas.
Exactly. So I was really happy about the lively discussion, and well, we're closing the session. Really thankful to all of you that you have stayed the last session until now, and we are obviously here if you would have any other questions. So thank you so much, and have a good evening.